Hello, good morning, everyone. As you know, this year we are focusing on the many aspects of the wisdom of God. And this month we have been focusing on how the law of the Lord is perfect. As Lee pointed out in her article in verses 7 through 11 of Psalm 19, we have some of the most perfect poetry in all of the Psalms. It's my favorite. This was a song of David sung in worship, and you may be familiar with the song we sing now from those same verses. So as stated by Matthew Henry, David here gives an account of the properties and the uses of the word of God in 6 sentences, in each of which the name Jehovah is repeated. And he's not just repeating this to be repeating this, but showing us that the authority and the excellence of the law comes from the lawmaker. Within these verses, it is shown how there are several wonderful effects of the law upon the minds of men, what it's designed for, what use we are to make of it, and how wonderful the efficacy of divine grace is going along with it and working by it. All right, so today I've asked everyone to take one verse from the reading and to expound upon it about what it says about God in the law, as well as to draw a correlation to another story that we read of in the Bible. So first we're going to read the verses together, and then as you'll notice, Liz is missing today. She's been having some family issues come up, but we're just going to go ahead and record this so we can get it out. All right, so let's read some of the verses together. Psalms 19, verses 7 through 11. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. It's hard for me to read that without singing it. Okay, so Amy, we're going to start with you, and you're going to take actually Liz's verse 7 as well as verse 8. So if you want to jump right in.
Yep. So Liz's verse ends with making wise the simple, and my verse ends with this enlightening the eyes. And I'm going to hone in on those two verses in particular, and they're really mirror images if you think about it, right? We're making somebody wise or we're enlightening them. I think, and I believe at least I know that this term from C.S. Lewis talks about chronological snobbery. And I want to hone in on that a little bit because I think we live in a day and age where we think we are wise and we have all of the information. We know how people should live. And we look back at former times and kind of look down on their times, or, can you believe they lived like that? And I think there is something to be said about living morally. But I think what's fascinating and interesting about that is, where do we get these ideas? Where do we have this understanding of how we should treat other people or relate with other human beings? And I'll be honest, every time I pick up the Bible, especially as I'm going through Leviticus, there are certain passages that I think, what? What? I mean, it feels like it sets wrong with me, or why did he put that in there? Why are these laws there? That doesn't seem fair, right? Maybe that's even a great way to put it. And so I want to hone in on this fact of that the law makes wise the simple and that it enlightens the eyes. Because I think we are viewing things through somebody setting in 2023 is right now what it is, right? But through this time frame. And so again, we feel like we're so wise and we have all the answers. But what does it look like as you are an Israelite coming out of the country of Egypt and you are going into a new land? What does the law look like then? And how is that? And so I wanted to hone in on this, and I think a passage we can look to is in Romans. So Paul is giving the Romans some information about the law, because now there is becoming this divisive kind of contention around the law, right? Do we follow the law, the Old Testament law? And I'm imagining that Paul's even gotten pushback, like, oh, so what, we just throw the whole law out? It's no good. And in chapter 7, he's giving them some guidance. So you'll bear with me for a minute. I'm going to read just from chapter 7, verses 7 through 12. And it says, "What then shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet, if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it was to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. So I'm honing in on that because what Paul is essentially saying is, I wouldn't have even understood I was bad except for the law. And that may say strange, like, well, why didn't God just leave us in ignorance? Well, go look at other cultures and see what that results in. If we're left in ignorance of what sin is and what it looks like, then it's chaos. It's just chaos. And guess whose law I get to follow now? My law. I get to do what I think is right. I am the standard. And thereby, what are you going to tell me is wrong? And so, truthfully, even when you look around us today, and when people are saying, well, there's no higher purpose, there's no higher thing. Okay, well, what are we going to go by then? Are you the law now? You're the one who makes the rules. So, what we have to understand is at the time when God set this law, this was the way the world worked. Guess who made the laws? The rulers of whatever country it was, the most powerful people. Whatever they thought was right went. And God is then saying, there is a better way. You are going to treat people correctly. You aren't just going to treat foreigners horribly. Go back and read some of the things in Leviticus. You won't treat them that way because you were once a foreigner. You know what it was like. You aren't just going to abuse. If a woman has been sold to you, you're not going to just toss her out because guess what? She has no way to live. You're going to either release her freely and give her pay, or you're going to keep her in your house and treat her correctly. You're not going to just toss your people that had been indentured to you. I'm not going to get into all the details of slavery and what that was like, but there were people that had to potentially sell themselves, right, to work off debt. And he was saying, you're not going to treat them poorly. That's not how it's going to be. You're not going to let your animals run loose and kill somebody else if you know that's how they've been acting, right? I mean, I could go through all of these laws to just say, he's giving them a better way. He's enlightening their eyes. He's making wise the simple. And so the Bible story that I wanted to hone in on that I think is interesting is David. So most of us understand the story of David and Bathsheba. I think what's interesting is kings at that time, go back and do your research. At that time, they can do whatever they want. They're the king. They can take whatever woman they want. They can send whoever they want off into battle. That's their right. They're king. So what makes David think that what he's done is wrong? And honestly, before Nathan even confronts him, if you read Psalm 32, it's a psalm that he's written, and he talks about how he felt even prior to this confrontation. In Psalm 32, verses 3-5, he says, "For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For night and day your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as the heat of summer. I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover my iniquity. And I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin." I want to hone in on that beginning part. Why was he feeling like he was wearing away? What was causing the guilt? It was the law. David knew ultimately what God thought of what he had done. It wasn't because the world around him was saying, man, David, as a king, you should have done better. That wasn't why. It was because he understood what God's expectations were for him, and it enlightened his eyes. He understood the wisdom. And so at the end, it was after Nathan confronted him, you do almost see this burden just coming off of his shoulders, even though it was a horrific sin. It's fascinating, the whole point where he fasts and he's praying about his infant son. But when he dies, he gets up and he says, I'm washing my face. I'm going to go through with life. I understood what God did. I get it. There's something different about David afterwards. And it's because he understood I needed to confess it. I understood I broke the law. I needed to talk to the Lord about that. And I guess what I want to hone in on today is that we can set in our positions and we can be very judgmental and think, well, what is that law about? And why would God do that? And why would he expect this? We are simple. There's no other way to put it. I don't care who you are. I don't care how smart you are. You're simple. And God is wise. And his laws are in order to make you wise. You may not understand the reason for it or the need for it, but you need to put yourself in the position of understanding his law is what will make you wise. You might not get it this side of heaven, quite frankly, but there are many times now as I've aged I have understood the wisdom in something, right? As I get a little older and I get further down the road and I think, oh, yeah, that's why he wants us to live this way or do this kind of thing. It's really ultimately for our benefit. So I think when we talk about delighting in the law, we can delight in the law knowing God has our best interest in heart, and he is helping to enlighten our eyes and give us wisdom.
Thank you, Amy. That was great. Okay. Randy, we've got verse 9.
Yeah. So verse 9 is, the fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. So the first account that really came to mind for me when I was reading this verse to see, like, I guess, to make it applicable within the scriptures or to see an example of it, I guess, was that of Moses when he intercedes for the people with God on the mountain. And so the first word here, the fear, is the same Hebrew word that we see in Exodus 20. In the beginning of the chapter, Moses has come down from Mount Sinai. He's come out of the presence of God and he's delivered the 10 commandments. And we see in verse 18, it reads, now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood afar off, and they said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. So it's actually the last fear in that passage that's the same. But I believe this idea is the same that David was addressing in Psalm 19, verse 9. The fear of the Lord is clean, meaning it's for our purification. There is motivation in this fear. It's ultimately to change our actions into doing what God wants us to. So unfortunately, what we see, I think this is it's a pretty familiar passage, but we see the Israelites fear without direction, and it leads them into the golden calf. So in verse 21 of the same chapter, it says that the people stood afar off. This is just continuing what I was reading earlier, while Moses drew near into the thick darkness where God was. So he really does, if you imagine this mountain, there's lightning, there's thunder, it's just this really ominous cloud, and Moses, like, sort of, he starts walking up and he just kind of disappears into this, and we see that he's on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. It's a long time. And so skipping over to chapter 32, starting in verse 1, it reads, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. So I don't know what they thought, but if you see all this thunder and lightning, he's gone for over a month. It's pretty terrifying things. I think they probably thought he was gone. So I think this account is pretty well known. Again, we know that Aaron tells the people to melt down all the gold that they brought out of Egypt, which was a lot of gold, and they make a golden calf. They were trying to appease God because they had not trusted, or maybe, I don't know, accepted the reality of worshiping only one God and to do it without idols, which Moses had really made clear. Again, like the 10 commandments had already been established. I think there are plenty of lessons here. So I think the main one is like fear or even love and dedication to our God ought to be seen in our willingness and motivation, but we've got to follow the commandments that God gives us. And that kind of leads us to David's next point. On the flip side, David says the rules, or some versions say judgments of the Lord, are true and righteous altogether. So while the reality of our God can be terrifying enough that it should provoke change in our behavior, The other side of that is that God is not an irrational authority. That's right. I said that right. God's judgments are stable and right and fair. In fact, all of those words are other words that are used in this Hebrew word. What was it? I think it's judgment or rules, depending on what version we have. Following the story during the giving of the law, God tells Moses what. So Moses is on the mountain, he's given the law, and God says, oh, you should probably go back down there because they're making a golden calf. And we know the story. Moses goes down, he gets really ticked off. He throws the tablets and he has to go back up and intercede. And that's sort of what I think is all tied here. Moses heads down to chastise the people, and then he goes back up to intercede for the Israelites. When Moses is in God's presence once again, so after all of this commotion has happened, God shows himself to Moses. And we see Moses's reaction in the presence of God in Exodus 34, starting in verse 6. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of fathers and on the children and on the children's children and the third generation and the fourth. Moses quickly bowed down his head towards the earth and worshiped. And so while the reality of God is terrifying and should evoke change in our hearts and actions, we take comfort not only it says that we should take comfort in his mercy. Not only in his mercy, but also in the fact that wickedness will be rectified. God will by no means clear the guilty, and yet we also see forgiveness and mercy and graciousness, love and faithfulness. And I think as Christians, then of course we can go to 1 John chapter 4. Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him and he in God, so that we have come to know and believe the love that God has for us. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. We see in verse 18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment, but whoever fears has not been perfected in love. So we know now as Christians, of course, we're told over and over in the New Testament, we need to feel confident in the fact that we are saved. And I think that's the second part of the verse. This fear is for the perfection. But God's rules and his judgments are true and fair. And if you have been sanctified by the blood of Christ, if he is interceding for you, then we know his righteousness. We can feel confident in his righteousness and his mercy.
That was great. Thank you. I like that you tied it back to that story. I feel like that's a perfect one for that. Okay. And so Lee, you've got verse 10.
All right. Well, really verses 10 and 11 are the summary of all of these pieces of God's word. The law, the testimony, the statutes, the commandments, the fear and the judgment of God, all of those things should be more desirable to us than gold. Even the purest, most refined version of what we understand as an earthly valuable substance. And they should be sweeter to us than that purest part of honey that comes from the honeycomb. And so we talked last month about the creation of God and how he shows himself to us through his creation. That's how we know he exists. He gives us the things that we can see, the visible things, to bring us to the invisible things. God's creation, however, isn't going to last. That's not the piece of this that's going to endure. And it isn't meant to be the thing that we worship. I think there's a lot said these days about the destruction of the earth and how we're destroying the earth. And I think there's something to be said that we should be good stewards of the things that God has provided. But much more valuable to us than the things of creation should be the spiritual thing that's going to outlive creation, and that, of course, is the soul of man, that those part of creation that also have part of God. The physical things of creation were never meant to be permanent. And I don't believe that man will be culpable in their destruction. Actually, creation doesn't define righteousness. It doesn't save us, and it doesn't sanctify us. It was not intended for those purposes. And in Hebrews 12, we're told that our faith doesn't bring us to a physical mountain, like the mountain that Randy was just talking about, but rather what our faith should do is bring us to the city of the living God. God is going to shake the earth. He's done it before, and he'll do it again. And the things that can be shaken, those things that are physical, are going to cease to exist, so that the things that are unshaken will remain, those unshakable things. And therefore, the Hebrew writer tells us that we are to be grateful and worship with reverence and awe, because our God is a consuming fire. And there's that part of the Lord, the fear of the Lord, which is clean and enduring. If creation shows us that he is, then to me, the law shows us who he is. And it should cause us to value his words, all of it. Perfect law that should convert our souls if we allow it to do so, if we will take it to heart. The testimony, which can take a ridiculous and empty-headed girl like me and give me something of value and wisdom in my brain, things that replaces the silly with the wisdom of God, the statutes which can give us joy even in life's difficulties, and the commandments, which, as Amy said, open our eyes to the light of God on a dark path otherwise. And the fear of the Lord, which motivates us to beg for mercy, and the cleansing of our hearts, and the understanding that his judgment is going to be true and right and deserved. And we have to consider those things. That's who he is. He is perfection. He's the giver of wisdom and light and mercy and sanctification and justice. His law reveals his character, and it makes his invisible attributes clear if we choose to see them. But that's what it requires of us. It requires of us to stop thinking in terms of the physical world and just the creation, and we have to start thinking in terms of the spiritual city, the city of God, that God's laws should bring us to. And in a way, we have dual citizenship. We are obviously part of the physical world, and we live and we navigate our lives within it. And yet we're also citizens of the spiritual realm. We have this, we understand the concept, but the reality of it is hard for us to break from the physical. The physical is so obvious. It's so easy to see. We're made from the dust of the ground, and then God breathed life into us and created us in his own image. And we received this dimension in the spiritual. And that's why in Matthew 6, okay, so I might not have read my email super carefully. Just going to go ahead and say I may have missed the part about linking it to something, but so I'm going to say this is my link. In Matthew 6, in verses 19 through 21, Jesus has to tell us, don't put your treasure in the physical bank. Don't invest your life here. You rather invest your life and what you have in the spiritual world, because we get to choose. We get to choose where we're invested. We get to choose where we live. You know, if somebody has dual citizenship at a certain age, some countries make you choose. Which one are you going to keep? We have the ability to do both, to do either. But Jesus says we have to choose. And he encourages us and puts the emphasis on that we need to choose the things that are going to outlast this world, those things that are unshakable. If we place our treasures here, thieves can steal it. Moths and rust are going to consume it. And we just have to understand we can't build our lives here. This is not our final destination. This is just the waiting room. And if this is where our hearts are, then not only are we missing out on the wisdom and the joy and the fulfillment that God's laws offer us here on earth, but we're also going to miss out on being in God's presence in heaven. Because verse 11 says, moreover, all of those things warn us. You know, if you talk to a financial counselor, he or she will tell you not to put all of your money in one account. That's earthly wisdom, right? You should put some over here and some over there. We even have a saying, you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. Because if one part of a plan fails, you've got safety in another place. We can call it hedging your bets. But actually, that's not what Jesus says. Jesus says, he doesn't say put part of your treasure in the invisible things and part of your treasure in the visible. And just in case one might end up being something we find helpful in some future time. It might turn out to be right. So, divide up, keep a foot in both places. He doesn't say that. He tells us that all of our treasure has to be in heaven, because otherwise it's going to be lost. It's not a question of which one's going to be better or which one will have a greater dividend or payout. It's a question of which one is going to survive and endure. The spiritual part of us is what's going to endure. That's what's going to survive. And so it is the part of us that has to be fed. It's the part of us that has to direct our decisions in the course of our physical lives as well. If our treasures are here, Paul Earnhardt says, we'll start paying our taxes to the devil. I like that. It's a great way to think about it. We'll become so absorbed in this world, and we'll focus on the things that are here, and we almost try to make things here permanent, as if somehow we could stay, or that this is where we want to stay, or we think we can stay, and we can't, and we won't, even if we want to, which honestly, most days I can't even imagine. Everything and everyone in this physical world is going to be wiped out. The end of this physical body will take us to those unseen things, the invisible things. And I'm going to stand before God, who knows not only what I've done, but he'll know what I've left undone. And he'll know why I did the things that I did, the thoughts of my hearts and my motivations. And so the laws of the Lord have got to be my treasure. They've got to be where I find the sweetness in my life. Otherwise, the things that I'm investing in are just temporary, and like our physical bodies, it's just going to cease to exist. I don't think it's wrong to have sentimental attachments to things of this world. I really don't. There are things in my house that wouldn't be valuable to anybody but me. They're just sentimental. But I have to understand that that's what they are. They're just sentimental. And John and Shelby, or Randy and Dan, or my other nieces and nephews, they're not gonna value them in the way that I do, because they won't have the same connections to them, and that's okay. It's just stuff. It's stuff that I like, but it's just stuff. We need to give up what we can't keep, so that we don't lose the only thing we will keep. Those are our choices, and there's just no middle ground. And so if we can't split our treasure up and have a little here and a little there, then we have to put all of our investment in the only thing that we can be sure of. And we need our faith to know where that is, that our faith is not built on fairy tales or myths. It's based on reality. And even though we don't make investments in this world, we understand that the physical needs of our bodies have to be met. But even the things of this world can be done in a way that we're laying up treasure in heaven. We have to eat. It's a physical need, right? But we thank God for the blessing of food, and we use the energy that it gives us to do his work. And that's what the scriptures tell us. You do everything as if you're doing it to God, because you are. Our investments have to be in heaven. And so even when we're involved in physical things, then we can be thinking about the spiritual realm. Christians should be the best neighbors, the best employees, the best people to work with, the most honest citizens. We aren't gossipers. We shouldn't be. We shouldn't be greedy. We shouldn't be careless or selfish or thoughtless. If we can have these things of the physical world be our focus on spiritual things, then we do it for spiritual treasure. You're doing the will of God instead of doing the will of man. And that way, then we're not defined by our culture. I don't have my culture tell me what fulfills me and what is going to bring me joy and what I need. You think about the advertisements that you see. I mean, I don't actually have American television, but it doesn't matter where you are. You are told what you should value, what's going to make you happy, what it is you need. We can't let the world tell us when we're important or smart or worthy or beautiful. We can't let our culture tell us those things, because as Amy pointed out at the beginning, that changes. Man and cultures change their mind. If that's what we navigate by, then we are going to be in a constant rotation of what we believe. And our opinions will change all the time. And we get the vision of being leaves blown about on the wind. And so in a world that is so focused on self-esteem, and we are told what we need, Jesus actually calls us out of that. Get out of that. Get out of your culture and open the word of God. We need to do that for ourselves, and we need to do it for our children. We need to do it for the young in the church and for the old. Quit listening to all that nonsense. That is not our treasure. We are here for now. It's true. But in our thoughts, we have to be there. We have to be in the next life. Our minds have to be focused there. We don't love this world. We love the real one, the invisible one, but the one that's going to last, the one that's not going to be shaken. That's the essence of being a Christian. And so God's law is what's going to fill us. It's going to be valuable. It's going to put wisdom in our heads. It's going to define us. It's going to tell us what makes us joyful. It's going to make us joyful, even when life is not joyful. And it will be sweeter and more valuable to us than anything else. And it will see us to the city of God. That's where it will bring us. And we don't want to miss that by allowing this world to tell us who we are. As I was writing this, I couldn't help but think of D. Bowman, who used to end every sermon that I ever heard him preach anyway, with, if we miss heaven, then we've missed it all. We've just missed everything, because it's the only thing that's real at the end of the day. And it's the only thing that has real value. It's where our treasure should be.
Thank you for that. Thank you, all of you, because those were all great thoughts on these verses. All right. And also thank you to everyone for either watching or listening to this month's roundtable. I hope you found it helpful. As always, make sure you check out the website at asharedinheritance.com for the new themed articles each month, as well as shorter topical pieces in the Trenches tab, as well as several full-length Bible classes. I wanted to Some of the most recent In the Trenches that are out, just wanted to highlight those for you. Most recently, there was one on the evidence of things not seen with Enoch. And then there's also on the People I Would Like to Meet series on Zacchaeus. And then Woe to Those Who Are at Ease. And so if any of those you would like to read, they are over on our website. All right, so thank you again, and please make sure to tune in next month when we discuss the topic of worshiping the Lord with gladness. Thanks, guys.